Elias had never considered himself remarkable. In fact, he often suspected he was the kind of man who might trip over his own shadow if it moved at just the wrong angle. So, when a flickering light appeared in his small apartment one Tuesday morning and a voice, not particularly polite, but not rude either, commanded him to appear in the grand hall of the Trivian palace, he blinked twice, spilled his instant coffee, and muttered, "Well, that's new." The light pulsed again, sharper this time, and Elias, with the sort of cautious resolve reserved for those who had long ago accepted the absurdity of life, stepped into the shimmer, expecting perhaps a dream, a hallucination, or at worst, a very aggressive hallucination. Instead, he was somewhere entirely else. The palace greeted him like a sentient being with a sense of humor. Floors tilted and corrected themselves, walls shimmered as though deciding which color to wear, and gravity occasionally flickered, nudging him forward in small, polite bursts. His first attempt at walking was an ungainly glide followed by a near collision with a hovering vase that whistled indignantly as he passed. "Sorry," he said, though the vase seemed unconcerned. Elias suspected that, in this place, objects had opinions, or at the very least, personalities. He felt a tickle of dread, along with a strange thrill, at being so thoroughly out of his element. Finally, he arrived at the center of a great hall, where a figure waited. She was unmistakably human in form, yet her presence radiated an otherworldly authority. Her skin was pale with a faint blue iridescence, subtle as the shimmer of morning frost under a violet sky. Long, graceful ears curved back from her head like delicate spires, each ending in a faint glow that pulsed softly with her breathing. Her hair was silver, falling in a cascade that reflected the light in ways that made it seem almost liquid, and her eyes, well, they held depth, not just like oceans or forests, but like the very galaxies themselves, spinning in quiet cosmic rhythm. Elias' mouth opened, closed, and then opened again like a poorly tuned instrument. "Elias," she said, her voice a musical hum that seemed to ripple the very air. "I have called you here because my daughter has chosen you." Elias froze. "Chosen me for what? A game of interstellar chess?" he asked cautiously, wishing he were joking but sensing with growing horror that this was no joke. "To be her father," the queen replied calmly, as if the statement were entirely reasonable and she expected no argument. Elias' brain stuttered. Images of diapers, school projects, and bedtime stories, none of which he had ever prepared for, especially not with an alien child, flashed across his mind. Then, as if to illustrate his ineptitude, he tripped over a floating platform and inadvertently kicked a tiny service drone. It whirred, spun, and sprayed a faint cloud of oil over his shoulder. "Great! First impression." "Disaster," he muttered, blinking at the queen, who merely arched a single glowing eyebrow. "Do not worry," she said, a trace of amusement in her tone. "It is tradition that first encounters are lively." Her words, like everything else in the palace, had layers he could not immediately decipher. Elias straightened, wiping oil from his jacket. He attempted a bow, which in a gravity flicker misstep turned into a lurch forward and a near planting of his face into the marble floor. A polite burst of corrective gravity nudged him upright, and he realized, with some dismay, that this palace seemed to anticipate every human error before it occurred. "Follow me," the queen said, turning with a grace that made Elias feel both clumsy and very visible. She led him through corridors that twisted and curved impossibly, staircases that floated in midair, and doors that shimmered into existence just as he approached them. Each room was a study in alien aesthetics. A library where books hovered, turning their pages with minds of their own. A conservatory where plants pulsed faintly with bioluminescent light, and occasional small creatures, part jellyfish, part feline, floated lazily, observing him with tiny, glowing eyes. Elias felt a mixture of awe, fear, and the creeping certainty that he might be entirely inadequate for whatever role this world had prepared for him. They reached a balcony overlooking a sky that swirled with twin suns, casting an iridescent sheen across floating islands that seemed to drift on invisible currents. The queen paused, and Elias realized she had been watching him, not just physically, but as though assessing every thought and hesitation. "You will learn," she said. That fatherhood here is not about control. It is about understanding, guidance, and connection. Elia's lips twitched into something resembling a smile. So, basically, the same as Earth, except interstellar, and with floating vases trying to kill me. The Queen's faint smile was almost imperceptible, a flicker of amusement that made her eyes sparkle like distant stars. Exactly. And your first lesson, she continued, begins tomorrow. You will meet her. Elias stared at the horizon, at twin suns bleeding into violet clouds, at a city suspended impossibly above a planet's core, and wondered how his ordinary, clumsy human self had been chosen for something so extraordinary. Somewhere behind him, a small jellicat dragon hybrid yawned and floated lazily past, brushing his shoulder with a tendril of light. Elias laughed, half out of disbelief, half out of nerves. If this was his new life, he decided, it would require a sense of humor, gravity management skills, and apparently a talent for dodging semi-sentient furniture. And for the first time in his unremarkable life, Elias felt chosen in a way that made the stomach flips almost worth it. Elias woke to a ceiling that shimmered faintly, like liquid silver, reflecting the dual suns that hung impossibly close to the horizon. The room itself was alive in subtle ways. Tiny motes of light drifted lazily, rearranging themselves into patterns he couldn't recognize but found oddly calming. He rolled out of a hovering bed, which swayed slightly as if it had its own mood, and immediately tripped over a ribbon of glowing ribbon-like cables that slithered across the floor like iridescent snakes. He muttered a string of curses under his breath, fully aware that this palace had been designed by beings with more elegance than sense of mercy for humans. Breakfast, if it could be called that, was served in a room where the gravity seemed uncertain, alternately tugging Elias gently to the floor or floating his plate a few inches higher than convenient. The Queen appeared, her long ears curved back delicately as if listening to some private symphony, and offered him a hovering cup filled with a steaming substance that smelled vaguely like coffee, but shimmered with hues of violet and gold. Elias accepted it with caution, lifting it with both hands, only to have the cup slide slightly out of his grasp as gravity flickered. He let out a startled yelp, and the Queen's lips twitched, just enough to suggest amusement without saying it outright. "You will need to adjust," she said gently, "but that will come in time." Elias nodded, unsure if he could adjust his sense of coordination to a world where the air itself seemed to have opinions about where he should be standing. He took a tentative sip and found the taste was oddly familiar, comforting even, as if the beverage had learned what humans liked and adjusted itself accordingly. Later, he was led to the garden terraces where he was to meet the daughter, the one who had chosen him, Liara. She emerged from a corridor lined with crystalline plants that hummed softly, her silver hair catching the sunlight in streaks of brilliance. Her ears were long and elegant like her mother S, but tilted forward slightly, giving her an inquisitive, mischievous expression. She was smaller than he expected, yet there was a presence about her that made the air seem to vibrate slightly, a hum of quiet authority and intelligence. "Hello," Elias said, waving awkwardly, feeling like a caricature of a polite visitor. Liara's eyes sparkled with curiosity, and she tilted her head, making him feel like an amateur trying to mimic interstellar etiquette. "You're clumsy," she said, her voice melodic but firm. "I like that, it's amusing." Elias blinked. Amusing is good. Liara smiled, a sly little thing that revealed far more awareness than her age suggested. "Very good, you'll need that sense." They walked through gardens that floated above the palace's foundations, where plants pulsed with bioluminescent light and small creatures drifted like jellyfish through the air. Elias tried to match her pace, misstepping several times and nearly landing in a reflective pool that was less water than some semi-liquid energy, eliciting a soft laugh from Liara. "You'll do," she said, teasing. Eventually. The morning passed in a series of lessons disguised as games. Elias learned to navigate the tricky gravity fields, balance on terraces that bent subtly beneath his weight, and dodge small creatures that, despite their size, moved with surprising intent. Liara was patient but never hesitant to tease him when he failed spectacularly, which was often. At one point, He attempted to pick up a hovering holographic book, only to have it pivot and deliver a gentle zap that left his hair temporarily standing on end. Liara clutched her hands in delight, laughing, while Elias muttered about how humans should come with manuals for alien parenthood. Amid the humor, he began to notice subtle marvels. Liara could manipulate small energy fields, shaping light into floating patterns, and Elias realized that she wasn't just playful. Her abilities reflected her species, advanced biology and intelligence. Each movement was precise, yet infused with childlike curiosity, a combination that made him both wary and enchanted. He stumbled over the realization that this child, while small, could easily outthink him, and that he would need to grow quickly to meet the expectations placed upon him. By mid-afternoon, the duo had stumbled into a conservatory where the walls were living membranes, subtly shifting and breathing. Liara pointed out plants that sang when touched and vines that wove themselves into shapes at her command. Elias tried, half-heartedly, to imitate her, resulting in a tangle of glowing vines that gently wrapped around his limbs. Liara's laughter rang through the room as she disentangled him, and Elias couldn't help but join in. It was exhausting, exhilarating, and completely unlike any parenting he had imagined, but he found that humor and patience could bridge some of the strangeness. At one point, Elias attempted to sit on a floating chair, misjudged its trajectory, and ended up upside down, dangling briefly before Liara tugged a tether that set him right. "Human strength is quaint," she said, inspecting him with mock severity. Elias sighed. "I'll take that as a compliment." As the day drew to a close, they found themselves overlooking the floating city below, its towers drifting like ships across the violet clouds. Liara leaned against the railing, silver hair glinting, her eyes bright with the reflection of the twin suns. Elias, exhausted and exhilarated, realized that despite the chaos, the laughter, and his unending clumsiness, a bond was forming. "Do you think you'll manage?" Liara asked, a teasing lilt to her tone. "I don't know," Elias admitted honestly, "but I'm willing to try, though I might need about 100 more cups of that coffee." Liara laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "We will see," she said. "We will see." Elias watched her disappear down a corridor, already plotting how not to embarrass himself tomorrow. For the first time, he felt that maybe, just maybe, he could be more than ordinary. Here, in a world of light, floating gardens, and laughter, he had begun to discover what it might mean to be chosen, and what it would take to be a father in a galaxy entirely different from his own. Elias awoke to a soft humming vibrating through the palace, a sound that seemed both mechanical and alive, like the heartbeat of the building itself. Today, the Queen had informed him, he would participate in the final ceremonial trials. The tests meant to measure whether he could truly embody the role of father, protector, and guide to Liara. The hallway outside his chamber shimmered faintly, as if sensing his apprehension and making subtle adjustments in lighting and floor tilt to both challenge and assist him. Elias took a deep breath, muttered, "All right, gravity. Let's be friends today," and stepped forward, only to trip over a floating ribbon of glowing energy that had decided to cross his path. A small, hovering drone zipped past him with a chirp that sounded almost like laughter, and Elias realized that the palace had a sense of humor just as sharp as Liara's. The first trial was straightforward in concept, but impossible in execution for a human with his coordination. Navigating a labyrinth of floating platforms, some of which rotated, flickered in gravity, or disappeared entirely for brief moments. Elias stumbled repeatedly, arms flailing as he tried to balance, occasionally bouncing off a semi-solid wall that hummed when touched. Liara floated beside him, her silver hair drifting as she laughed softly, offering tips in her melodic voice. "Push against the field that isn't there yet," she teased once, and Elias could only grunt in confusion as he obeyed, somehow managing to land on a platform just as it flickered back into existence. His face burned red, but there was triumph in surviving, and he realized the trial was less about dexterity than patience and ingenuity. Next came a test of intellect, a chamber filled with floating holographic puzzles that projected themselves in 3 dimensions. Shapes twisted and morphed, forming sequences that defied conventional logic. Elias rubbed his temples, muttering to himself, "This is why humans have calculators, if only interstellar ones counted." Liara floated beside him, her long ears twitching in amusement. She offered a subtle hint, bending a pattern of light with her fingers so that the final solution shimmered into view. Elias grinned. "Ah, so cheating is acceptable if it's part of the teamwork." Liara laughed, confirming that sometimes partnership mattered more than solitary brilliance. The final trial, the most daunting, involved protecting Liara from a simulated planetary defense malfunction. Robotic drones whirred and darted, sending streams of energy toward her as holographic shields flickered to life. Elia's first instinct was panic. He ran in zigzags, accidentally activating a defense field that sent one drone spinning into another in a spectacular explosion of sparks and laughter-inducing light. Liara clapped, floating above the chaos. "You're ridiculous," she said fondly, "but effective." It was then Elias realized that courage didn't always mean perfect technique. It meant improvisation, presence of mind, and care. He intercepted a final energy blast with a shield he hadn't intended to deploy, flinging a small drone harmlessly into the distance, and the chamber fell silent, signaling the trial's conclusion. Breathing heavily, Elias turned to Liara, who floated down, silver hair drifting like liquid starlight. I think I understand now," he said quietly. "It's not about me being perfect. It's about being here with you, learning together." Liara's eyes sparkled, the faint pulse of her ears echoing her excitement. "Finally! Took you long enough, human." Elias chuckled, a sound that mixed relief and pride, and realized that he had grown, not in skill alone, but in patience, empathy, and understanding of a world far beyond his own. The queen appeared then, her presence serene and commanding. She observed Elias with those deep, galaxy-filled eyes, noting the changes in posture, expression, and the subtle confidence that now radiated from him. "You have completed the trials," she said softly. "Not because you have mastered them perfectly, but because you have embraced the essence of this role. You have chosen connection over fear, humor over despair, and courage over hesitation. That is what is required of a father in any world." Elias felt warmth rush through him. Never had a compliment carried such weight or seemed so true. Liara floated to his side, looping her small hand through his, a gesture of trust, approval, and affection. "You're stuck with me," she said, smiling. "Don't worry, I'll make sure you survive." Elias laughed, imagining the future, homework in zero gravity, playful misadventures in the floating gardens, and the quiet, profound moments of connection that would define their lives. He realized that family wasn't a static role or a set of duties. It was a journey of shared experiences, laughter, and learning together across the stars. The palace itself seemed to acknowledge the moment, the walls glowing warmly, the hovering plants bending slightly as if bowing in quiet celebration. The small jellicat dragon that had appeared in his first days zipped by, brushing past his shoulder with a tiny puff of light, and Elias laughed, remembering how far he had come from the awkward, oil-stained scientist who had first stumbled into this world. He had become more than he had imagined, more patient, more capable, more human in ways he had never expected. As the twin suns dipped behind floating spires, casting golden and violet streaks across the palace, Elias stood with Liara at his side, feeling the quiet hum of a world that was now his as much as hers. Humor, chaos, courage, and love had intertwined to shape him, and in that intricate tapestry of experience, he finally understood the true meaning of being chosen. His ordinary life had been replaced by one extraordinary in every sense, and he would not trade it for anything. Not for certainty, not for ease, not even for gravity that always made sense. He looked at Liara, silver hair glowing in the sunset light, long ears tilted with curiosity and mischief, and smiled. "All right," he said, "let's see what tomorrow brings." And in that moment, the palace, the garden, and the floating city all seemed to pulse with quiet approval, as though the universe itself was nodding to the rhythm of a human heart that had learned to beat in harmony with alien worlds.